There are a few mistakes I see people make when building a crosscut sled, and I never hear all of them talked about. If you make one crosscut sled, this is the one you need. The first mistake I see people make when building a sled is not integrating a stop block. Or if they do integrate a stop block for repeatable cuts, they don't do it in the simplest or most effective way. It's usually a little too complex for me, which is not hard to do, or it involves buying a bunch of stuff. I do things a little differently. For this, that means definitely not buying a stop block. I can make one for a fraction of the cost, and we'll get to that in a little bit. The simplest way I've found to make the back fence of a crosscut sled is to cut 3 pieces, one of which is a little narrower than the other 2. Now there's a groove for the T-track to go into, and you don't have to use a dado stack to cut that groove. But as you'll see in a little bit, the T-track doesn't fit quite right, but there's a very easy fix. I made a little boo-boo. Sorry, I've been talking to a 2-year-old all day. For the front fence, I decided to glue 3 pieces of plywood together. Sounds about right. The back fence has 3 pieces. Why not the front fence? Well, I started to think that could add just a little bit of extra weight that's not needed. So I actually decided to remake that front fence to only use 2 pieces of 3/4 inch plywood. I actually got inspiration for this sled from Jonathan Katz-Moses. I just thought I could do a couple things a little differently. He's got a phenomenal YouTube channel that is definitely worth checking out. And he sells phenomenal tools at kmtools.com. Not sponsored. I cut the top and bottom of this back fence flush on the table saw, and now it is time to install the T-track, which of course is short for Thomas track. Oh no, it won't fit. Just calm down and relax. A statement my wife loves to hear from me. We're gonna just widen that groove a little bit. Bingo, bango, bongo, fits perfect. You're going to start noticing that I'm building this sled in a way so that it is not symmetrical. And I'll get to why that is very soon. This is what I would consider a mid-sized crosscut sled. It's definitely not small. So I tried to decrease unnecessary weight whenever possible. That is why I took the front fence down from 3 pieces of plywood to 2, and why I made it a lot shorter than the back fence. It just does not need to span the whole length of the crosscut sled because its main purpose is to keep the sled together. Okay, mistake number 2. I see this all too often, and I made this mistake on the first crosscut sled that I ever made. This does not surprise me. At this point, I should change my middle name to Mistake, or Evelyn.
Ted Evelyn Mosby.
People try to cut the runners that will go on the bottom of the crosscut sled to the exact width that they need to be so they fit in the miter grooves on the table saw perfectly. I am cutting my runners to be ever so slightly narrower than the grooves for this reason. If you try to cut your runners to the exact width they need to be, they'll either be too big and won't fit in the miter slots, or they'll be a little too narrow and there'll be some play side to side, causing your crosscut sled to not be very accurate. I am instead cutting the runners a little narrower and then using thin wooden shims to butt each runner towards the outer edge of the miter slots. This will ensure that my crosscut sled fits onto my table saw snug as a bug in a rug. Hey, I got it first try. I'm using hickory for these for 3 reasons. 1, it's what I had on hand. B, my best friends growing up were Dickory and Dock. And Roman numeral 3, there's a species of hickory called shagbark, and that's just phenomenal. I'm using birch plywood for every other part of this sled because it's the cheapest plywood at the lumberyard. And I really like the grain pattern, so I try to use the crazy grain side as the show side on my projects. Some fun facts about birch: the tree can be used to make birch beer and syrup. Yeah, I'm that guy at the party. Wood facts nobody wants. I'm using 2 pieces of T-track here because I already had a couple shorter pieces on hand, but you can buy 48-inch long T-track and it's not very expensive. We'll get to all the dimensions in a little bit and the reason why if you only had one crosscut sled in your shop, this should be it. Ooh, this is entertaining. I did pre-drill my holes, but I did not pre-drill them big enough. And I tightened the screw just a hair too much, I think. Okay, the sled is getting very close to being all done. Crosscut sleds are phenomenal to have in a shop because they're great for cutting lumber that may be just a tad too big for your miter saw. You may be thinking I'm trying to move my table saw. That is not the case. I'm just trying to push my sled, but it is not moving very easily. Let's attach the front and back fences before we get to mistake number 3 that will help us move our sled a lot easier. I'm not going into how to use the 5-cut method to get the back fence perfectly square because that involves a lot of numbers and math, and that's not really my thing, like at all. But Jonathan Katz-Moses and the Wood Whisperer on YouTube have phenomenal videos on that subject. Okay, mistake number 3, not using wax on the bottom of the sled. It is very satisfying how much this helps the sled slide, nay, glide on the table saw. And it makes it smell lemony fresh. This sled is 42 inches wide and 24 inches deep, so it can cut some pretty hefty pieces of lumber. To ensure it moves good enough, I need to test it out once. Okay, maybe twice. Why not a 3rd time? Okay, 4th time, but that's it. Installing T-Track is one piece of the puzzle in ensuring that this crosscut sled can make repeatable cuts. The other piece is making a stop block. I always recommend making your own stop block instead of buying one because it's just so much cheaper. Yeah, there are some great stop blocks out there you can buy, but it only costs a few dollars to make your own, and it's a very simple process. And the way I make it, the stop block does not move when you use it. I just cut a piece of scrap wood to 2.5 inches wide. Then I cut a groove about 1.5 inches long, 1 inch from the edge. I cut that piece to 3.25 inches long and the piece with no groove to 3 3/8 inches long. These dimensions are perfect for my back fence, which is 3.5 inches tall. Enjoy the circus act that is me trying to insert dowels into the stop block as I explain why I did not make this sled symmetrical. For 99% of the cuts on a crosscut sled, my working piece is on the right side of the blade and my waste piece is on the left. And most of the time, my working piece is a lot longer than my waste piece. So having more work surface on the right side of the cut line allows me to use my stop block for longer pieces and keeps the weight down on this sled. I could not cut this part out, it's just too funny. To prevent this from happening, I could have just used screws instead of dowels or just made my dowel holes a little bigger. If you enjoy all the silliness in my videos, consider supporting me on Patreon for more content and a big discount on my plans. I'll put a link down in the description for that, as well as a link to the wood wax, star knobs, and T-Track that I used in this video. If you want to have 2 crosscut sleds in your shop, I would encourage you to build this one along with a smaller one for thinner stock. But if you could only have one, I prefer this size because it allows me to crosscut both thinner and much larger pieces of wood. And it was extremely smart of me to demonstrate this large cutting capacity by cutting about the thinnest piece of wood I could find in my shop. But as the kids say, that tracks. Building a crosscut sled is a great way to make the most of your table saw, but it's not enough. There are other upgrades for the table saw that I think are essential, and here's a video all about that.